But there's no doubt that, paralegals already are using generative AI, and they will be using it much more in the future. Yay, paralegals. Advocate for paralegals.
Yeah. Couldn't do it without them.
Hi, I'm Jason Susser. I'm a partner at Siskind Susser Immigration Lawyers, and I'm also a co-founder and the chief legal officer of Visalaw.ai. When we first started talking about AI systems, and really we were talking about expert systems that we would call them, things like that. The ideas we had or products we were trying to build were things that we thought would help young lawyers. You can be as experienced as a practitioner as possible and still benefit from using generative AI because you can save time, right? And so if you're using Gen AI to find answers to legal questions quicker, if you're using it to draft emails, petitions, cover letters, responses, any of those things, you're saving time. So I think that's a big difference from where we were a couple of years ago on who does this work for. Everyone practicing law, there's something that they do right now that could be done quicker and more efficiently using AI. I have a fairly large practice, and the type of work I do is mostly labor-intensive, lawyer-intensive types of filing. They're extraordinary ability petitions, national interest waivers. They're cases that typically involve a 15 to 30, sometimes 50-page, memo or cover letter with each case. Maybe 5 or 10 years ago, a case like that might take several weeks to prepare a rough draft of. I think a lot of lawyers still take several weeks to do a first draft on that. Now, I think where we're going now using AI, generative AI drafting is, where we went from 2 to 3 weeks to 2 to 3 days, and now I think we're going to be at 2 to 3 cases per day. And this is something that Greg told me some years ago, and it's come back to my mind over and over with. There's so many conversations about like AI replacing paralegals or replacing lawyers, and I don't think that's true at all. And I think that as we're able to use AI to be more efficient and we can start preparing more cases at a time, what I think will happen is the role of the paralegal and the role of the attorney is going to shift. And if you use our law firm as an example, I was a paralegal, an immigration paralegal. And when I was a paralegal, I would say the paralegals at the firm probably spent 70% of their day doing manual data entry. We sent Word document intakes back then. People filled them out sometimes in pencil, sometimes with a computer, depending on how sophisticated the client was. And then the paralegal would get that intake and we would manually enter, name, date of birth, all of those things. Well, and then you fast forward a few years later, case management comes along and is able to auto-populate forms. We have more paralegals now than we did then. So how does that make sense, right? 70% of their job was replaced by case management at some point, yet we need way more paralegals now because the role of the paralegals shifted. It went from data entry 70% of the time to more complicated things. They were answering more emails, holding clients' hands. They were able to work more on cover letters and things like that back then they either didn't have time for, or people had this idea that like, oh, paralegals, it was like above the paralegals, which it wasn't, because most of those career paralegals were absolute experts in what they did. So if the lawyer is spending less time drafting a brief and the paralegal is spending less time filling out forms, that should mean there are more people available to take calls, follow up on emails before the client bumps the email up your inbox, right? And we can become even more like white glove service, even more concierge or boutique service for the clients, which ultimately that is what separates different legal providers. One thing we will see change over the next few years is that generative AI products will become law firm tools and not just lawyer tools. It's unthinkable in 2025 that you wouldn't let your paralegals use Google or some sort of other internet web searching. And I think that as this becomes more common technology, we'll see paralegals and other support staff using generative AI just as often. And so then the crux will be, are they using a secure source of generative AI? Are they properly trained on generative AI? That will be a part of being a paralegal or being a law clerk or any position in a law firm. And part of how good you are at that job will be based on how good you are at using the tools you're given. But there's no doubt that, paralegals already are using generative AI, and they will be using it much more in the future. And there's just a lot of parts of an immigration case that can be done by paralegals. A lot of those paralegals may have been doing that type of case for 10 or 20 or 30 years and be absolute experts in it, and now they'll be able to do it even quicker, using these generative AI tools. Yay, paralegals. Advocate for paralegals.
Yeah. Couldn't do it without them.